while Missouri is calling for all-out gun confiscation. A new bill, House Bill 545, introduced by Democrats Rory Ellinger and Jill Schupp, would ban the possession, the sale, the transfer, the manufacture of semi-automatic rifles and high-capacity magazines, and would make the holders of them in Missouri Class C felons. If this bill becomes law, it would give Missourians 90 days to either oust their illegitimate government who's infringing on the Second Amendment, or to get rid of those weapons, or be prosecuted and jailed. It's very similar to the kind of legislation that was passed in New York State and introduced in California. These are the people like Governor Andrew Cuomo, who said the Second Amendment's a scourge on society. No, it's not an individual protection meant to hold back tyrannical government. That's a scourge on society. Disgusting stuff, but what do you expect from these people? An expert has told us that they will combat terrorism. Oh, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. With the guns, we have a special report. Dan Badandi is our Northeast correspondent. He interviewed Stuart Rhodes, attended a rally there in Rhode Island about how people there are rallying for their Second Amendment rights. Do we have that report ready?
This is Dan Badandi reporting for the InfoWars Nightly News. We are in Providence, Rhode Island, at another pro-Second Amendment rally, one of many across the nation. You know, the government is after our Second Amendment, and you got Dianne Feinstein hell-bent on taking our arms away completely, and what they're doing is slowly incrementing, like limited magazines of 10 rounds, and what kind of ammo you can buy now, and all of a sudden assault weapons are going after. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's ridiculous. I think if they want us to give up our guns, they should do it first. They should stop putting drones in our skies. They should stop saying they have the ability to arrest us and put us in jail without trial or charge. They should stop listening to our phone calls without a warrant under the Patriot Act. And they should stop militarizing our police forces. And then if they did that, maybe I'd consider limiting guns, but I don't think so.
The long line of Americans who have bled, died and bled, for liberty stretches all the way back to Lexington Green and all the way forward to right now in the sands of Iraq and Afghanistan and here in America. If we let their sacrifice be in vain, our children will curse our names for giving away their birthright of liberty, desecrate the tombs of our fathers and our grandfathers, and we will also desecrate our own family honor for our children.
In our Constitution, we have an amendment that recognizes that the government must always trust the people, and the people must never trust the government. And that, believe it or not, is the Second Amendment. It doesn't mention guns, it doesn't mention knives, it doesn't mention swords, it doesn't mention weapons at all. It just says keep and bear arms, and it's all about trust.
And Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the famous Russian dissident, says that in the gulags, they look back and they realize their mistake. He said, how we burned in the camps later, wondering what things would have been like if we had realized we had nothing to lose. And instead of paling in terror for the knock of a door in the middle of the night, we had set up an ambush down in the hall, using picks, pokers, axes, whatever was at hand. Despite Stalin's thirst, the machine would have ground to a halt without the willing tools and implements of oppression. Well, you have a duty and responsibility to honor the Constitution and defend it against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that means you have a duty and responsibility to protect the Bill of Rights above and beyond. You know, as General Smedley Butler said, the famous Marine Corps general, the only thing we're fighting for is your homes and the Bill of Rights. And so now it's the Bill of Rights on the chopping block, and you have a duty to step up.
Now, as you can see, folks, we've got tons of people here that are supporting the Second Amendment, braving the Northeast that we have here, and the government's about to call a state of emergency, so we got people here out supporting the Second Amendment. And thank you for watching. This is Dan Badandi for the InfoWars Nightly News.
And thank you, Dan Badandi, for that report. So why are people talking about the Second Amendment? Well, we talked about it so much in the past month and a half, 2 months. 3 months, you name it. But again, if you haven't seen the piece I did a few weeks ago, the founders intended us to have personal arms again and again and again. They have quotes showing us that, in addition to the Second Amendment. But what is even that all about? Are we just arbitrarily holding ourselves to the words of some men from a couple hundred years ago? No, these are people who read history, who knew history, who are on the backs of the Enlightenment, who are playing off of why are there so many despotic princes and kings and priests and other arbitrary rulers ruling over our lives? Why does this keep happening? What can we do to limit the power of despots, to discourage tyrants, to discourage kings from running amok? What can we do to empower our own lives? That's what the Bill of Rights comes out of. That's why you see people in this video, Stuart Rhodes of Oath Keepers and others among them, talking about history, talking about the lessons we learned, talking about the things they don't want to repeat, because we know that history does repeat unless we learn from those mistakes and keep them from happening again. We should never give up on the Second Amendment. We should hold fast to that wisdom, build a better society off of it, but never should we give up those arms. We'll only get more Dorners and more corrupt LAPDs, more corrupt Obamas if we ever let go of those arms. We need to keep them to stave off oppression. That's the whole point. Now, turning to the population issue, we've seen these globalists, the Council on Foreign Relations, you name them, again and again use any excuse to sell their eugenics oppression agenda. It is the same agenda as the top-down New World Order control system, where they have degraded, debased, and dehumiliated not being a good choice of word. They have deprivated humankind. They have lessened, they have cheapened life, and they will use any excuse. We see here where terrorism in Mali and in Africa is now being used as a population control excuse, with a Chatham House, that is the Royal Institute of International Affairs, speaking in the Foreign Policy Journal, which is the Council on Foreign Relations journal, to sister organizations, about Mali's 2.5% problem, going on to describe how in the aftermath of Algerian attacks and insurgency in Mali, expect to hear an overwhelming silence about the population issue. The taboo continues to surround the issue of population control needs to be cast aside. New and highly drastic means of curbing the rate of growth have to be devised in order to put into practice if this dire threat to regional and international stability is ever to be averted. And so they just take anything and they tell us, because there's tension in the Middle East, we need to have greater population control, and that will stop terrorists because they're just fomenting out of the lack of resources in their region. Actually, they already tried to push population control on the Middle East. They didn't accept it, and that not only stirred up the populations, it caused a lot of resentment that was later amplified by the ongoing wars throughout the Middle East and Northern Africa. But furthermore, it was an excuse for the West to implement central banks, to set up their own kingdoms, to implement systems they wanted to control those populations. And it's really related to the overall resistance, while the population control issue is just being pegged on by the elitists when they see any kind of incident going on in Africa. And then Urian Masson, who wrote this article and has written many fine articles lately, goes on to say they're going to use this excuse for everything. The answer to drunk driving is culling the population. The answer to curing cancer is culling the population, so less people will die as a result of cancer. They've already used it for climate change, saying because of climate change, terrorism will be caused, so we are justified in having the bankers run off tens of thousands of people from their lands and handing it over to corporations. Yes, it's good for the earth. It's good for stopping terrorism. Yes, anything to cull that population. Yeah, they'll use any excuse. I've been through it in detail. So many other researchers.